steady, humid and warm. You'd grow if I put you in there. Now, you remember I showed you how to sow seeds for summer flowers. Well, exciting things have happened. That's what I did with my Cosmos and my Begonias. Was I sowed them. You saw what I did. Very, very fine seed like Begonia. It's like dust sowed on the surface of the compost. The Cosmos, I just lightly covered with compost. And then I put them in this, my little factory, a little propagator. So what is a propagator or a propagating case? It's a place where you can start off propagating, growing things. Seeds, cuttings will all start their life here in a sheltered, warm environment that's humid and conducive to growth, other than somewhere where it's going to get drafts and fluctuating temperatures. There's a thermostat in here, and it will keep the atmosphere in there steady, humid and warm. You'd grow if I put you in there. You can get smaller versions of these that will fit narrowly on a windowsill inside. You can even plug them in with a little heated panel at the bottom. Relatively inexpensive, but so useful at giving seeds that boost to start them off in life. It's heated to about 20-21 degrees Celsius. That's about 70 Fahrenheit. The heat is in the bottom, and this is where they've been since I sowed them. Here are the Begonias, an absolute rash of tiny, tiny seedlings. And these are the Cosmos. And the sweet peas too, which I pushed in, if you remember, with a pencil. This is such a wonderful moment, however long you've been gardening. You sow a few seeds, dry as dust, and you think, what can they possibly do? And then you end up with young plants. The trick now, of course, is to move them on. They can't stay in here. They're going to run out of food, going to run out of sustenance. We need to give them a home that will see them as their main halfway growing house before we plant them out in the summer. You can tell, because they've grown so well in this small space, that they're really gasping now to grow up. They're turning into adolescent plants, and we know what adolescents are like when they want to move house. They're keen. So I'm using little wooden trays. I like wooden seed trays. There's a kind of nostalgic appeal to them for me. You can use plastic ones if you want, but make sure they've got good solid rims on them if they're plastic. Some of them are really flimsy and will crack. Don't throw away plastic. Try and keep using it as long as you can, and then it's okay. So they're ready for a move, and this is where we do the operation we call pricking out. What pricking out means is basically transplanting these youngsters to a wider spacing so they've got room to grow. That's it, simple as that. Why pricking? Well, you'll see I use a sort of pricking motion in a moment to get them transferred from the pot into the tray. Use a compost which is recommended for young plants and seedlings. You'll see it written on the bag, and this says suitable for pricking out. When I've got all this compost in to what I think is a good level, I'm not firming it too hard, doesn't want to be solid, so it's just tapped. But it's easier to prick out into, particularly with tiny seedlings, if the surface is smooth. I made this from old floorboards and 3 bits of square doweling. It's a presser. It just smooths the surface of the compost. You can tell how old this is. It's got woodworm, but it's still very serviceable, and I'm very happy to use it. I'm not pressing very hard. I'm really just sort of rubbing it on the surface to make the surface smooth, because particularly with smaller seedlings then, you've got a better chance of getting them evenly planted. So there we are. Not overly firmed. You can still see my fingers indenting if I press the surface too hard. I am ready to start pricking out. I'm going to start with the Cosmos. Now, to transplant them, you need a dibber, but quite a fine one. This had a little tiny spade on the end of it. I never used it, so I chopped the spade bit off, and it makes a great dibber, slightly tapered, pointed at one end, and this is used both to prise the seedlings out from the container in which they're growing and to make the hole in the new one and tuck the compost back around them. Make sure you've watered your seedlings really well. I gave them a good soak before I brought them out, because what you don't want them to do is to get a check to growth. Take your dibber, push it down the side of the pot and prise out a cluster of seedlings. And lay them on the surface of the compost. Now, the most fragile part of these little plants is the stem between the shoot at the top and the roots at the bottom. Try not to touch that at all, but instead, with your dibber, prise the roots apart, keep holding the top half of the plant, not the central stem, and put your first plant in. Now, do not worry that you're burying it rather more deeply than it grew in that pot, because that will encourage it to be more stocky when it grows. Lightly push the compost around it, and there you are. You've reduced its height, which is handy. Those roots will develop further up that stem and it'll be perfectly happy. And what you do is you space them out in the tray, and generally with a tray this size you're looking for about 2 inches apart, 5 centimetres. You get about 4 down one side and 6 down the other, which means you get, how's your maths, 2 dozen plants. So that label can go in there, and then I shall give them a good soak. Start your watering off the tray on the path and then move across the tray. Then you don't get that initial gush, which might just dislodge them. Once it's going, you can keep on watering like that. And again, it'll take quite a lot of water to penetrate right the way through. Remember my rule of thumb, 1 inch of water travels downwards 9 inches. I think, bearing in mind that's only about a couple of inches, we've got enough. And you'll tell from the weight of the tray. Yeah, there they are. They go now not back into the propagator. They don't need that heat anymore, but into the greenhouse where it is protected cultivation. I shall stick them on this shelf here where they've got plenty of light. So what we do with seedlings as tiny as this, like lobelia and begonia, is get yourself a little green cane and sharpen the end of it, almost like a pencil, but even longer and thinner, and then separate it once it's gone onto the surface of the compost. But don't, for goodness sake, try and get them as individuals. Just little tiny clusters like that. But then the technique is the same. Into that hole. But you don't need a deep hole for these. You barely need to just bed them into the surface. These are not seedlings to bury. You do need a steady hand. But it's the sort of job I think in a way is good for the soul. There we are. Nice reward for a bit of patience. I'll water them in, then they'll go in the greenhouse, again not in the propagator, but in the sheltered confines under glass, and then when all danger of frost is past, out in the garden. And I'll try and remember the day I had with you, planting out all these little tiny seedlings that grew from specks of dust. I'll be posting new videos each week, so subscribe to the channel below and let's get gardening together.